And now for something completely silly. A few random British things seen through the eyes of one particularly absurd American woman. Hi, I'm Dara, and if you're new to the channel, Magenta Otter Travels is a place I created for Brits and Anglophiles around the world to gather and talk about British stuff. So welcome. Sometimes the things we talk about are serious, sometimes they're funny, and sometimes they're completely silly, like today. The UK is known for some very funny place names. I'm going to give you examples of a few of the places that I've gone by a sign and it's just kind of made me smirk. I'd love to hear examples of British places that you thought had really funny names. The Cotswolds is my favorite part of Britain, and we've spent a lot of time around there, as well as the Malvern Hills in Gloucestershire and Worcestershire, and there are some favorite funny place names of mine, like Upton Snodsbury. I don't know why, but every time I go by this sign, it just makes me smile. And Wire Piddle. I mean, I'm sure that there's some logical backstory for this name, and maybe some viewer will tell me in the comments that, you know, Wire means river in Welsh, or I don't know. I'm sure there's a good reason why this town got this name. But all I can tell you is that every time I see this village name on a sign when we drive by, the piddle makes me giggle. Same with Birdlip. We have driven by this place a million times, and every time the same thought goes through my head when I see the sign. I didn't know birds had lips. And then there's this place near the Peak District. I can remember vividly making Ian stop the car so that I could get out and take a photo of this sign. And he was just sitting there, SMH. He is a very patient, tolerant husband. Speaking of my tolerant husband, when our sons were 12 and 14, we were on our annual family trip to Britain, and I put on the itinerary an extra half-day trip to drive all the way out to this little village and take a photo next to the sign. I just think it's so cute, and it is literally one of my top 5 favorite photos in the history of ever. And I just gotta ask you, how many people do you know that named their 2 children names like this so that they could one day take their kids 12 years later to a place to get a photo like this? I mean, I'm just truly absurd. But judge me if you want. I had the cutest Christmas card that year, and I don't regret it. Now that I have a YouTube channel, my patient husband can expect to be asked to stop the car on many occasions so that I can take pictures of funny things in the future. And on the topic of place names, if you haven't already watched it, please check out the video that Ian and I made where we attempt to pronounce and teach our American friends how to pronounce a lot of tricky British place names. I will link it above and in the description below. Now let's talk about animals. Of course, the US has our share of wildlife and farm animals as well, but encountering these critters whilst driving around the countryside is very different, in my experience. I grew up in a very rural part of Illinois outside Chicago, amidst a lot of cornfields and dairy farms back in the day. And when I think of driving around in farm country in the US, I think of big open fields and livestock in fenced-in pastures. You might encounter a deer bounding across the road, or raccoons or possums scurrying about, or if you're in Texas, it might be a coyote or bobcat or a slow-moving armadillo that doesn't quite make it across the road. The UK is famous for very narrow, somewhat curvy country roads. And I think this happened because a very long time ago, windy little sheep trails eventually were converted into roads traveled by people in cars. However, as Americans, we often drive through these roads thinking, was this road really intended for two-way traffic? It looks like a one-way road when you're sitting there and you can like reach your arms out both windows on either side of the car and touch the walls or the hedgerows. Many of these wee little lanes are bordered by hedgerows and/or stone walls, which makes it a bit stressful for those of us who aren't used to driving on those roads to get through them safely. You might encounter a hedgehog on these roads, but in the daytime, it's more likely that you will encounter other types of wildlife or farm animals. Here are some photos of some of our encounters. Sheep. This is probably the most common one. Now, this photo just shows one particularly obstinate sheep positioned in the center of the road staring us down, but more often it's a dozen sheep or more who are meandering or toddling along the road and getting in the way when you're trying to drive through. Also, there's horses. We had to give way to a long line of folks on horseback when we were traversing this narrow country lane a few years ago. And then these young pheasants were completely blocking the way when we were traveling through one of the back roads of the Cotswolds. And then there's cows. So many cows. Some of these cows are in the wide open highlands, and some of these cows are in crowded little lanes. Some of these cows are quite up close and personal to those of us traveling in the car. And on the subject of cows, I have to share this little video clip from when we were kayaking on Lake Windermere in the Lake District last year. We're going along kayaking, and then we encounter a group of sunbathing cows on the beach. I thought this was hysterical. I have never seen anything like this in the US, and I've been around a lot of cows, but I just thought this was fantastic. Can someone please explain to me why we have all these farm animal encounters in the roads of Britain, but not in the US? Is it because we have these fences that keep the livestock all contained in the States? Explain that to me. I'm not sure how much of my experience is just because of the areas in which I've spent time on both sides of the pond. I talk about animals a bit in my British countryside video, particularly farm animals and cute baby animals that my sons played with. So if you love adorable animal pictures, I would say check out that video. Now, it's not just sheep and cows that make driving a bit challenging on these narrow country roads. There's also other vehicles. And what is particularly anxiety-inducing for me is when you come face to face with a giant bus or coach on one of these roads, like when we were in the predicament shown in this photograph. Now, our companions in the car at the time thought this was actually really funny, but it totally stressed me out that we were trying to figure out how to get around this huge bus. But perhaps I'm just a little too tightly wound. Next up, let's talk about food. Now, if you've watched any of my Britain Love Stories videos, 5 of them are about food, you will know I'm a little obsessed with food. But what I haven't really explained is why. Yes, of course, I love eating food, but it's more than that. I had a 30-year career as a marketing professional, and most of that time I worked for food companies. So I spent a lot of time thinking about marketing food, advertising food, packaging food, describing food. And food advertisements and packaging are always interesting to me. And a lot of things I see are just funny to me. Here are a few things that I've found on recent trips. I'd also love to hear any stories of funny foodstuffs you have encountered. First up, this is just a terminology difference. Strips of frozen breaded fish in the US are called fish sticks. And in Britain, they're called fish fingers. Which, of course, you know what that makes me think. Gee, I didn't know fish had fingers. So, along that same line of thought, when I was shopping last January in England and came across this in the store, you know what I said in my head. I didn't know pineapples had fingers either. This ad, or advert as they say in Britain, that I saw in a bus shelter would not make any sense to an American. So let me do a little bit of explaining for context. In the US, when we eat spaghetti for dinner, we just call it spaghetti. You would say, do you want to have spaghetti for dinner? Or I went out to eat and I had spaghetti. And it's just kind of understood that that's spaghetti noodles with a red sauce with meat in it. Whereas in Britain, it's just a lot more specific. Britons almost always say spaghetti bolognese. And this is such a common thing to eat that they abbreviate it with spag bowl or ball, or I'm not sure how you say it. But an American seeing this ad would definitely say, "What's a spag ball?" If you know me, you know I love pie. Well, cheese too, we all know that, but let's stay focused here. I love pie. And so, after our first trip to Chatsworth House, as we're driving through Derbyshire, we bumped into this. It just happened to be the day of the baking festival in Bakewell. So I see this sign, Baking Festival, a picture of a woman holding a warm pie, like, yes, please. So needless to say, we stopped there for a visit. For Americans who don't know, Bakewell is the home of the famous Bakewell tart, which is kind of a short crust pastry, almond flavored. It's got jam in it, icing on the top, a cherry in the middle. Now there's some debate over the whole Bakewell tart, Bakewell pudding. I'm sure some British viewers can clarify that whole discussion for us. But just to stay on topic, we're there in Bakewell at the festival. I'm excited about eating the pie that I saw in the picture, and then I walk into the festival and I see this chalkboard sign. To an American pie lover, this is both a bit mystifying and, I'm not gonna lie, a bit disappointing for someone who is excited about having pie. These are not the pies I was thinking about. So I went over to the broccoli booth and I was relieved to see that penguin pie is not actually made from cute penguins. It is, in fact, a combination of smoked haddock, cheese, and potato. Now, I'm not a big fan of fish pie, so of course I didn't have any. But I was just relieved to know that no cute penguins were harmed in the making of that pie. However, rabbit pie is another matter entirely. This is something you would never see in the States. At another bakery in Bakewell called Bloomer's, they have rabbit pie on offer. And again, because I'm a marketing nerd, I was fascinated by the description on the package. A pie made from a traditional recipe that really lets the gamey rabbit flavor stand out. Oh my. No thank you. Now, while I have all the American viewers sitting there with their faces squunched up in disgust, I have to show you this box of fun I encountered at a market in Skipton. Yes, that says fat balls. Insect-flavored fat balls. But don't worry, these are not intended for human consumption. They are actually bird food for wild birds, which I think is awesome. But I did think the name was hilarious. Now for the British viewers, this is the American version of fat balls. They're called fat bombs, and I'm embarrassed to say these are created for human consumption. Not this human, mind you, because I am not going to be buying those. But apparently some people eat these all the time and swear by them. In my next trip to Britain, I would love to take you on a video tour of a British grocery store, seen through the eyes of this middle-aged American foodie and food marketer. Is anyone interested in seeing that? Let me know in the comments. Next week's video will be more funny British bits, so make sure that you're not only subscribed, but you've clicked the bell so that you don't miss out. And if you're wondering, why am I such a rabid Anglophile? Be sure to check out my Britain Love Stories series, which tells you all my favorite things in Britain. Thanks so much for watching, and do something good in the world today.